I recently spoke with a factory owner in Monterey who was initially celebrating.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he showed me the news on his tablet, the 50% tariff on Chinese imports. And he had this triumphant look, like a man who just won a long shot bet.
Right. We're saved.
Exactly. He said, finally, gesturing to his assembly line, we can breathe. We can compete. He was genuinely energized. I mean, convinced this administrative wall was a miracle cure for his margins.
The magic bullet.
Totally. But then he took me onto the floor to show off a new piece of equipment he just installed. It was a high-precision sensor housing.
Okay.
So I asked him a simple question. Where do you get the specialized alloy for the casing? And he paused, and his smile it faltered a little bit.
Ah, I see where this is going.
He said, well, we import the raw casting.
Yeah.
And the microcircuitry.
Oh.
That comes from a supplier in Shenzhen, the calibrated testing ring.
Let me guess. Also Shenzhen.
Also Shenzhen. As we walked, the whole atmosphere just shifted. That triumph started to feel a lot more like a stay of execution. He was realizing that by taxing his competitor, he had effectively taxed his own nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
That 50% wall wasn't just keeping Chinese goods out, it was choking the very lifeblood of his own factory. It's this strange, almost clinical irony.
Yeah.
The moment North America decided to protect its industry was the exact moment it admitted that it no longer understands the physics of how things are actually made.
Right. We treat trade like it's a legal argument, a set of rules to be litigated.
But out there on the factory floor, it's just a matter of industrial gravity. This isn't really a trade war. It's a collision between, well, administrative fantasy and physical reality.
And that's the thing. When you look past the headlines of January 1st, 2026, you realize these tariffs aren't an instrument of power.
They're a confession of decline. And the real question isn't whether the wall will work, but what happens when the torrent of East Asian manufacturing just flows right through the cracks we forgot we couldn't fill.
That narrative, that moment of dawning realization on the factory floor, that is the perfect encapsulation of our mission today. We are doing a deep dive into that exact collision you described.
Right.
On one side, you have these administrative trade barriers, like that 50% tariff slapped onto, 1,463 categories of Chinese goods.
And on the other side?
On the other, you have the unyielding physics of how the 21st century actually makes everything, from that specialized microcircuitry to the high-end testing rigs.
We're talking about the systemic gap between a policy brief written in a capital city and the physical reality of a supply chain that stretches all the way across the Pacific.
Exactly.
Our goal here is to really dissect that confession of decline that's embedded in these tariffs and to show you, the listener, exactly how this irresistible torrent of East Asian manufacturing is rendering these paper barriers, well, obsolete.
This is an exploration of why industrial capacity isn't measured in legal arguments or, policy talking points.
It's measured in kilograms of finished specialized alloy, the availability of gigawatts of affordable energy, and the fundamental capacity of a state to actually build things quickly and affordably.
So when we look at this tariff structure, we have to start with what you could call the paradox of protection.
Okay.
In the political sphere, imposing a steep tariff, 50% or more, it's sold to the public and to struggling domestic manufacturers as an economic miracle cure.
It's the simple fix. The mindset is that this barrier will shield domestic margins, boost local sales, and protect North American industry from, what they see as unfair state-subsidized competition.
And on paper, that logic has a certain appeal, right? If you instantly raise the cost of the competing product by 50%, you theoretically level the playing field.
You buy yourself some time. You give domestic industries that have been struggling for decades a chance to finally breathe and reinvest. It feels like you're slowing the economic clock.
But the clock doesn't slow down on the factory floor. In fact, it speeds up, often in reverse. As your Monterey contact realized, that 50% wall didn't just tax the foreign competitor.
It taxed his own nervous system.
His own nervous system. To really get this, you have to appreciate the hyper-specialization of modern manufacturing. We aren't talking about, basic inputs like steel or plastic.
No, these are precision items.
Exactly. Specialized alloy castings, specific microcircuitry, calibrated testing rigs, things where the intellectual property, the tooling, and decades of accumulated know-how are all concentrated in very specific high-density clusters in East Asia.
Which means if I, as a North American manufacturer, need that unique alloy casting because no one here can meet the right tolerances or volumes, the tariff just becomes an unrecoverable mandatory input cost.
That 50% premium is added directly to your final product.
Making me less competitive globally and probably even locally once the inflation from all this kicks in.
So this tariff structure, just by existing, it implicitly admits a devastating truth.
That we don't command the full production process anymore.
We don't. We are dependent on the very supply chain we are now trying to punish.
And that structural dependence, that inability to find these crucial, specialized intermediate goods at home, is why this whole thing is being seen not as a strategic move from a position of strength,
but as an administrative surrender. It's a profound admission of failure. The North American system is facing a physical, tangible output, the sheer volume and complexity of production flowing out of these disciplined industrial economies.
And its only response is a piece of paper.
A paper barrier.
Yeah.
Because it lacks the physical capacity to compete on efficiency, speed, or quality.
This connects directly to a concept we need to unpack, which is the metastasis of Vitocracy into the realm of trade.
Yes. Vitocracy is, it's a crucial concept. In political science, it's defined as a dysfunctional system of governance where institutional power is so diffuse.
Spread out everywhere.
Spread out across countless agencies, courts, interest groups, that no single entity can acquire enough political capital or, bureaucratic authority to make and execute necessary large-scale decisions quickly.
So it's a system that's perfectly engineered for delay and paralysis.
Exactly. So when a system is structurally incapable of running faster, meaning it can't quickly overhaul its regulations, rebuild its supply chains, or accelerate its infrastructure, it resorts to obstruction.
It tries to slow everyone else down.
The tariffs become the most visible, final administrative act of a system that is too slow, too expensive, and too gridlocked to compete on industrial merit. It's a panic response, a legislative attempt to slow down the competition because we can't accelerate our own economy.
So the Vitocracy, which has already paralyzed our ability to build things at home, now tries to legislate away the superior capacity of others.
And you can see this administrative burden impacting the front lines of trade, creating this real physical exhaustion. It's not just the factory owners who are suffering.
It's the people who have to process the massive administrative complexity these tariffs create.
Which brings us to another story, this one about a woman named Elena. She's a customs broker, working on the docks of Veracruz, dealing with the flow of goods every single day.
Okay.
She described her professional life now as just being constantly buried under a mountain of new administrative paperwork, filing exemptions, calculating the complexities of this 50% surcharge.
But the ships are still coming.
That's the thing. She noted that despite the massive penalties and the regulatory maze, the ships from East Asia keep coming, and they seem to be getting larger and more frequent.
But why? If there's a 50% tariff, shouldn't the volume just drop off a cliff?
Elena's frustration is rooted in this realization that the physical efficiency and the sheer velocity of the East Asian supply chain remain the path of least resistance, even when you burden it with that huge penalty.
What?
She explained that the productivity differential, the gap in cost, speed, and reliability for sourcing these specialized parts is so large that the cost of the 50% tariff is still often cheaper, faster, and more reliable than trying to source a comparable part locally.
Or dealing with inconsistent quality and supply chain risks from fragmented North American alternatives.
Exactly. So that's a chilling thought, isn't it?
The inherent industrial advantage is so great that a 50% paper penalty is basically just a surcharge. Elena described it powerfully, like trying to stop a massive river with a stack of legal documents.
And that realization is the source of her exhaustion. She gets it. She understands that the government is trying to legislate away a deep structural productivity gap, a gap that's measured in concrete, in physical output, logistical brilliance, and decades of strategic industrial investment.
The administrative surrender she's seeing isn't some abstract concept to her.
Not at all. It is the daily reality that policymaking has become completely detached from the requirements of the physical world. While we fight on paper, the physical power of these resilient, integrated supply chains just reroutes, accepts the penalty, and continues to dominate.
And these tariffs, they create a perverse feedback loop internally, don't they?
Yeah.
I've seen reports from the logistics sector that the sheer increase in handling, warehousing, and processing fees to manage these new complexities could raise their overall transport costs by 15 to 20%.
And that's money that doesn't go to the domestic manufacturer. It goes straight to managing administrative overhead.
Right.
For logistics companies that operate on incredibly tight margins, this means immediate pressure from clients, slower demand growth, and a need to absorb this cost or, pass it directly to the consumer.
It is the definition of a self-inflicted wound disguised as economic protection. It just accelerates inflation and increases the overall cost structure of the whole North American economy.
Which is just...
So if the tariff is failing at the port by just becoming an expensive surcharge, where do policymakers hope to reroute this torrent of manufacturing? And that brings us to the next great promise and, well, perhaps the next great fantasy nearshoring in Mexico.
The narrative of nearshoring to Mexico is presented as the obvious geographical solution to the tariff problem. The idea is that companies will pivot from East Asia to North America's closest neighbor, bypassing the tariff and gaining supply chain resilience.
But it's not that simple.
It's dangerously simplistic.
Yeah.
A structural assessment of Mexico's industrial reality shows that.
So you're challenging the popular belief that Mexico has the capacity to just seamlessly absorb all this high-tech, high-volume production.
Absolutely. The assessment is that Mexico's manufacturing base is not a sovereign, vertically integrated industrial ecosystem. A better way to characterize it is as a parasitic assembly line. It's fundamentally dependent on imported specialized components, intellectual frameworks, and managerial expertise from overseas. It can assemble products very effectively, but it can't originate or fully supply the parts needed to make those products.
This dependency is illustrated perfectly by the experience of Mateo, the floor supervisor in Monterrey.
Right.
For years, Mateo was overseeing the assembly line at an electronics plant. His team is highly skilled at fastening components, taking motherboards, high-end sensors, specialized casings, and assembling them into finished goods.
So when the 50% tariff news hit, his manager was probably cheering.
He was, thinking their business would boom. But Mateo, watching the crates come in, he noticed the unsettling physical reality. While the cost on paper went up, the physical contents of the crates didn't change at all.
The problem wasn't the final assembly process, it was everything upstream from that.
Exactly. Mateo realized they still had to import all those specialized motherboards and sensors. He said the local area simply lacks the specialized tool and die shops, the high-purity alloy smelters, or the dense network of secondary suppliers needed to supply their operation locally.
So to him, the tariff is like, what?
He said it felt like a heavy velvet curtain pulled across a massive window. It hides the outside world, but it doesn't change the fact that the manufacturing room itself is structurally empty.
The room is empty because the entire area lacks the industrial density and specialization required for full-scale advanced manufacturing.
Right.
And this assembly-only model, it's not an accident.
No, it's rooted in the specific economic ideology Mexico embraced decades ago, the Ricardian ideology of free trade.
The idea of comparative advantage, right, David Ricardo. Every nation should specialize in what it does best and then just trade for the rest.
And for Mexico, that meant its insertion into knowledge capitalism was primarily focused on leveraging its abundant, low-cost workforce and its geographical proximity to the U.S.
And critically, this approach required Mexico to dismantle much of the strong, state-led industrial policy it had previously pursued. After the 1980s, the focus shifted entirely to aggressive economic liberalization and deregulation.
Which fractured the state's capacity to strategically direct industrial growth.
Exactly. And the resulting development pathway was characterized by neoliberalism, deep deindustrialization outside of the maquila zones, economic stagnation, and rising social inequality.
Which created the Ricardian trap.
Yes. Mexico was encouraged to specialize in areas of low technological content, primarily final assembly, because that was its comparative advantage. But by fading its efforts to develop core technological competencies and deep vertical integration, it just configured itself into a state of economic dependence.
And permanent technological backwardness relative to countries that were pursuing a different path. It became a perfect assembly base, but not a resilient industrial power.
And the data on this provides undeniable proof of this structural limitation. You can look at the long-term decline in aggregate domestic value added, or DVA, in Mexico's exports.
And DVA is the share of the final product's value that was actually created within Mexico.
Right. And the trend is alarming. DVA in maquila exports fell precipitously from 31% in 1981 to just 21% by 2006.
Yeah, a 10-point drop.
And even more recently, if you look at the performance of the IMEX firms, the big export-oriented manufacturers, between 2007 and 2013, the domestic value added continued to decline, falling from 28% to 24%.
And what's really revealing is where that decline happened.
It wasn't just a general market share reallocation. The decline was specifically driven by changes within certain industries, especially the critical large electrical machinery and electronics sector.
Which means that Even as global trade expanded and policies were aimed at increasing local sourcing, the individual assembly plants were, on average, decreasing their reliance on domestic inputs over time.
They were becoming more reliant on imported components, demonstrating a fundamental failure to grow the local supplier ecosystem. The nearshoring fantasy just hits a brick wall of this DVA data. Mexico is geographically close, but industrially hollow.
Okay, so let's pivot and contrast that failure with the path taken by China, the path of the competitive state, which is a fundamentally different economic logic designed to avoid the Ricardian trap entirely.
Absolutely. China's model involved a highly active, focused state deploying rigorous industrial policy from the top down. The primary focus was not maximizing assembly volume.
It was developing an endogenous circuit of knowledge and intellectual property.
Exactly. The state wasn't just a passive regulator of trade, it was acting as the coach, the manager, and the national venture capitalist all at once.
So the goal was not to be the world's assembly floor, but to own the intellectual property and the core technology behind what was being assembled.
Precisely. The aim was to build intellectual property advantages through the independent development of core technologies, specialized materials, and globally recognized proprietary brands. And this required massive, sustained state investment and coordination across research, manufacturing, and education.
And when you look at the DVA data for China, you see the exact opposite trend to Mexico.
The mirror image. While Mexico's domestic value added was falling, China's DVA and processing exports increased substantially, jumping from 35% in 2000 to 49% by 2006.
And that increase was driven by?
It was driven by within-firm substitution. But in this case, it was firms successfully replacing imported materials, components, and machinery with superior domestic ones.
So it confirms a deepening of the local industrial ecosystem and a successful move up the value chain. This is the hallmark of successful industrial policy.
It is. It's designed for technological sovereignty.
So the core difference, it really boils down to one concept: vertical integration.
It does. China commands a closed physical loop. They often control everything from raw material extraction through specialized chemical refinement, component manufacturing, the specialized alloy casting, the microcircuitry you mentioned, and then finally to assembly and brand development.
And this accumulation of industrial capability across the entire value chain generates resilience, cost efficiencies, and a quality differential.
That paper barriers like a 50% tariff, they just can't negate. The efficiency differential is simply too great.
So the lesson here is that industrial capacity is the result of strategic, generational accumulation and sustained state action. It's not something you can just whimsically relocate or create by administrative fiat.
Not at all. If the productivity differential established through deep vertical integration exceeds the height of the tariff barrier, the barrier becomes nothing more than an inflationary tax on your own domestic consumer.
And this need for these protectionist tariffs, this failure to compete industrially that we've been talking about, it's not an isolated trade phenomenon. It circles right back to the structural atrophy of the West's underlying governance model.
Back to the Vitocracy itself.
Yes. We have to confront what some sources are calling the Great American Paradox. The United States, arguably the wealthiest and most technologically advanced nation in history, is uniquely, even spectacularly, inefficient at building critical public infrastructure.
It's true. We see costs routinely running 2 to 3 times higher than those in peer nations like Germany, Japan, or Spain. Timelines are measured not in years, but often in decades.
This is a signal of a profound structural failure, and you can trace it back to a historical shift. We moved away from the era of muscular state-led development.
The New Deal era, the post-war period.
Right, where federal agencies had the bureaucratic capacity, the political mandate, and streamlined procedures to execute massive projects quickly and efficiently.
And that system was gradually replaced by the Vitocracy.
So how do you define Vitocracy in functional terms?
It's a system where power isn't centralized, but diffused into a million veto points. Just imagine a vast construction project where every single regulatory agency, every single local planning board, every single specialized interest group, and potentially even every citizen holds a functional veto over the entire enterprise.
It ensures that the collective will. The need for high-speed rail, new energy grids, modern ports is perpetually stalled.
Gridlocked by individual opposition or procedural litigation. If the New Deal state was a highway builder, the Vitocracy is an endless legal skirmish over who gets to approve the paving material.
And the key mechanism responsible for transforming governance into this paralysis is the environmental review trap, primarily centered around the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA.
NEPA's original intent was noble, to be clear, to ensure environmental considerations were integrated into federal decision-making.
But in practice?
In practice, it has metastasized into the primary legal choke point for almost every major public works project in the country.
It's the procedure that acts as the weapon.
Yes. NEPA mandates the production of these unbelievably extensive environmental impact statements, or EIS. These documents have to cover every conceivable impact of a project, often taking years and costing tens of millions of dollars before a single shovel ever hits the dirt.
And when you say every conceivable impact, you mean?
We are talking about documents that have to analyze everything from noise pollution and the disturbance of non-endangered habitats to the truly ridiculous, like the potential shadows cast by a new bridge on a private garden. These procedural requirements must be met with microscopic perfection.
And once that massive hundreds of thousands of pages EIS is submitted, the regulatory compliance process is basically outsourced to the adversarial court system. This is where the veto power gets weaponized.
Precisely. Any determined opposition group, a local homeowners association, a rival business, an environmental organization focused on one technicality, can hire a specialized lawyer, find one procedural loophole in thousands of pages, and file a lawsuit.
And that lawsuit doesn't rule on the merits of the public interest, whether the bridge is actually needed.
No, it rules only on process. And the filing triggers an automatic injunction, halting the project for months or even years while the court reviews the bureaucratic procedure.
And this systemic delay is now a fundamental, baked-in component of the cost structure of American infrastructure. The whole incentive structure is completely perverse.
It is. The penalty for moving slowly, for delaying, for debating endlessly is effectively zero. But the penalty for trying to be bold, for trying to execute a project quickly, is the guarantee of a decade of procedural legal hell.
This systemic risk translates directly into dollars and cents, particularly in labor costs.
It does. If you compare labor costs on major U.S. projects, they represent 40 to 60% of total project costs. Now compare that to our peer nations, Germany, Japan, Spain, where labor accounts for 19 to 30% of total costs.
And that difference isn't just high union wages, is it? It's the risk premium.
It is absolutely the risk premium. It's the cost of inconsistency. Specialized contractors and high-skilled labor, they can't rely on consistent, uninterrupted work. So if a billion-dollar project is constantly at risk of being shut down by an injunction for 2 years, the specialized firms have to charge significantly more when work is authorized to cover the massive fixed costs of just sitting idle.
Or the expense of demobilizing and then reassembling specialized construction crews after a multi-year halt. The cost of delay becomes the cost of labor.
Furthermore, this broken system incentivizes massive procurement failures. Contractors, they know the game. They submit unrealistically low bids just to win the initial contract.
Because they know that procedural hurdles, NEPA reviews, permitting processes guarantee delays.
Exactly. Once the delay hits, they can then extract enormous additional funds through litigation, change orders, and negotiating extensions. The cost overruns aren't accidents. They are a predictable, profitable feature of the Vitocratic system.
And this perpetual gridlock forces the entire development paradigm to be biased toward tiny, incremental projects, patching up the old instead of building the new. Because anything large and transformative is a guaranteed target for litigation.
The ultimate tragic symbol of this atrophy is the state of U.S. public works. You look at projects like the California high-speed rail, which stands as a global example of how internal debate and procedural paralysis can entirely substitute for physical action.
This structural paralysis in the public sphere is inextricably linked to a fundamental shift in how Western capitalism now functions, the triumph of financialization over the real productive economy.
We have to draw a clear distinction here between industrial capitalism and finance capitalism.
Okay.
Industrial capitalism, in its classical form, sought to minimize feudal rent things like high land prices, excessive taxes, usurious interest rates. Its goal was to maximize productive output by ensuring the state provided essential public goods at minimal cost.
Like efficient infrastructure, basic education, standardized regulations, things that make the entire industrial economy globally competitive.
Exactly. Finance capitalism, however, seeks wealth primarily through the extraction of economic rent.
So how do we define that extraction?
Economic rent, in this context, is wealth you derive not from creating new value, like making a better widget, but from controlling access to necessary fixed resources and services or leveraging financial advantage.
And the mechanism for this is the dominance of the FIRE sector: finance, insurance, and real estate.
Yes. The nation's top engineering and intellectual talent is increasingly siphoned away from industrial design and component optimization toward financial engineering, designing complex debt structures, maximizing quarterly returns, and extracting value from existing assets rather than building new ones.
And the numbers detailing this structural cannibalization are just stunning. If you look at major U.S. corporations today, they earmark well over 90% of their recent corporate income for activities like stock buybacks and dividends.
They are literally consuming their own future. They're borrowing money to fund these buybacks, focusing entirely on artificially inflating the short-term share price to benefit management and institutional investors,
which cannibalizes long-term industrial capacity, R&D, and infrastructure reinvestment. Production capability is sacrificed for short-term capital gains.
And the logical conclusion of this paradigm is the financialization of public goods. Finance capitalism views things that should be natural monopolies or public utilities, healthcare systems, toll roads, education, not as public goods to facilitate competition, but as untapped rent opportunities.
You privatize or financialize them to extract monopoly rents,
which then raises the cost structure for the entire economy. Think about it. The financialization of healthcare and education means that North American workers and their employers have to shoulder these massive, crippling costs for private insurance and student debt.
And that adds an enormous, inescapable cost premium to every single product made in the U.S.,
creating a profound structural competitive disadvantage against developmental states that strategically supply these essential services at minimal cost, treating them as necessary public utilities for industrial success.
So America's industrial decline is deeply intertwined with the institutional atrophy of Vitocracy and the financial sector's pursuit of economic rent.
Okay, so if Section 3 showed us the pathology of the Vitocracy, a system that's designed for inaction, we now need to pivot to the complete opposite model.
The order of concrete. This is the East Asian model, rooted in the developmental state, where efficiency is literally treated as the supreme form of economic justice.
In the developmental state model, the government is not merely a referee or a passive regulator. It is the active player, the owner, the coach, the manager. Its foundational goal is strategic, rapid, and sustained national economic development.
We saw this historically with South Korea's centrally directed chaebols, or Japan's powerful Ministry of International Trade and Industry, MIT.
MIT was famous for acting as the nation's strategic coordinator, mobilizing capital and deliberately directing it into promising industrial sectors, steel, automobiles, advanced electronics,
with the explicit goal of generating massive spillover effects for the whole society and dominating global export markets. Its strategic long-term capitalism focused on building capacity, not extracting rent.
And critically, infrastructure in this model is governance made manifest. Projects move with the physical weight of sustained state will. There is no Vitocracy to stall them.
A great example is the China-Laos Railway.
A truly powerful physical example of this state capacity. It's not just a commercial transport link connecting two nations. It is a physical, undeniable statement about the capacity of the state to execute complex projects rapidly, transforming a historically landlocked nation into a land-linked hub that provides immediate, tangible economic integration and development.
And that kind of integration requires a foundational advantage, and that starts with energy sovereignty.
Absolutely. The modern industrial machine runs on power, and China has strategically mastered its energy supply, achieving massive dominance in solar, wind, and nuclear power capacity.
The scale is just incredible.
This relentless focus on building capacity resulted in China installing an astronomical 357 gigawatts of clean energy capacity in 2024 alone. This overwhelming abundance of power drastically lowers the embodied energy cost of every single product they export.
Meaning the energy required to smelt the alloy, run the automated assembly lines, and power the data centers is just far cheaper than in competing nations.
Precisely. The result is industrial electricity costs that are exceptionally competitive. China's industrial rate is reported to be around 5.15 cents per kilowatt-hour, and Vietnam's is close behind at 6.1 cents.
Compare that to much higher, often volatile rates in North America.
And this efficiency isn't just a marginal saving. It enables massive continuous investments in automation and high-density industrial clustering that are necessary to maintain a global competitive advantage.
The physical infrastructure, the energy grid, and the supply chain density, it creates these industrial clusters that are virtually impossible to replicate quickly.
Which is captured perfectly in the concept of the one-hour circle. This is a story from a consultant who advises major tech firms. He frequently contrasts the logistical reality in high-density industrial clusters, like those outside Shenzhen, with the fragmented manufacturing zones in North America.
And in Shenzhen.
In Shenzhen, a factory owner operates within what he calls a one-hour circle. Due to the extreme density and vertical integration we've discussed, the owner can source every specialized component, every screw, battery, sensor, and circuit board within a 60-minute drive.
And this whole ecosystem is powered by a rock-solid automated energy grid designed for industrial scale.
Now, compare that to the alternative. The consultant described his experience in a new North American industrial park where they recently faced unpredictable energy rationing due to grid fragmentation and aging infrastructure.
And if they needed a single specialized part?
They had to wait weeks for it to arrive from overseas because the local area lacked the secondary suppliers needed to create that self-sustaining cluster.
So the sheer physical density and deep integration in the East Asian model create a temporal and reliability advantage that no paper tariff can overcome. The speed of the machine is the competitive edge.
And logistical throughput efficiency is paramount to maintaining that temporal advantage.
Right.
The World Bank's Logistics Performance Index, the LPI, it consistently highlights what amounts to a species difference in infrastructure efficiency. China's automated ports, integrated high-speed rail networks, and streamlined customs processes offer reliability and speed that provide a decisive edge in inventory management and time to market.
So if the capacity and speed difference saves you 3 weeks of inventory holding costs and guarantees your product arrives on schedule, paying even a substantial tariff might still be the single most rational economic choice.
It might be the only rational choice.
And finally, we have to talk about the cognitive surplus. This accumulated intellectual capacity is the true, untaxable backbone of their industrial strength.
Right. While tariffs can raise the price of a physical product, they cannot tax the human capacity for innovation. China's sustained dominance in STEM graduation rates and its massive volume of patent filings contribute to this cognitive surplus, a collective intelligence of millions of engineers, technicians, and specialized supply chain managers.
And that intellectual momentum makes a 50% price hike irrelevant over the medium term.
Because their innovation cycle is exponentially faster, they can design around the tariff, redesign the product to use a domestic input, or simply produce the next generation of technology before the West has finished litigating the environmental impact statement for a new factory.
That's a powerful point.
The consultant noted that this cognitive surplus renders a 50% price hike irrelevant because the innovation cycle is perhaps 200% faster. This deep, accumulated intellectual and technical capacity is the ultimate physical reality, and it cannot be taxed, regulated, or legislated away by any administrative act.
So the conflict ultimately is between paper barriers and physical truth.
And the truth of high-density automation, energy sovereignty, and vertical integration is fundamentally prevailing.
So when we synthesize this entire deep dive, what we are witnessing is not just a clash of trade policies. It's a battle between two completely divergent economic logics for global supremacy in the 21st century.
On one side, you have the Western Vitocracy, which expends its energy primarily on maintaining the form of governance, the endless debate, the litigation, the procedural overhead, which actively hinders its capacity to build.
And in this system, economic activity is increasingly organized to funnel profits into the financial sector through rent extraction, rather than reinvesting in productive physical capacity.
And on the other side, you have the East Asian model, driven by the developmental state, which ruthlessly prioritizes long-term physical output and capacity. It focuses on tangible development and efficiency, ensuring that the economy serves the national interests of production and industrial sovereignty, not the narrow interests of a financial elite seeking rent.
The final unassailable verdict, then, is that physical output does not lie.
It doesn't. The civilization that can build high-speed rail, pioneer new industrial technologies, and command a fully vertically integrated, resilient supply chain will see its productive force permeate any paper barrier thrown up against it.
And the tariffs, imposed by a system incapable of building its own replacement infrastructure, will only accelerate inflation and internal decay within North America itself.
The administrative wall will be built, but the physical reality, the torrent of cheaper, faster, and more reliable production, it will simply flow around it, under it, and through it.